The Hawkeyes escaped out of Bloomington with a win. It's another tough road test this weekend as they travel to Evanston to take on Northwestern. This is Incompetent Sports Talk. Welcome to Incompetent Sports Talk, along with Mike Rabin and Jake Burgers. I'm Alex Salzma. The Hawkeyes escaped out of Bloomington with a win. They beat Indiana 18-13. A win is a win. I will take a win. I don't care if you have to block 2 field goals at the end of a game to beat UNI. I don't care if you have to beat Indiana 18-13. Mike, I'm sure these are your feelings too, but what did you think of the game?
Absolutely. A win is a win, and the Hawkeyes will take it. And Kirk Ferentz, congratulations to him getting his 100th career victory as a head coach, and Darrell Johnson-Koulianos for breaking the Iowa all-time receptions record held by Kevin Casper. There's a lot of storylines in this football game. Iowa, their inability to convert red zone trips into touchdowns was a big problem during the game, but fortunately Iowa executed when they had to. Marvin McNutt, the 52-yard touchdown reception from Ricky Stanzi, and then the defense making enough plays and Indiana just not executing on that final play. Iowa, they'll take the win, and it's going to be a tough game. Northwestern is a more disciplined version of Indiana.
And Michael Meyer, Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week, 4 for 5 field goals, hit that clutch 42-yarder in the fourth quarter, Jake.
Well, it was a much closer game than what many people expected, but I think there are a lot of positives to come out of this game. Obviously, we won, so that's a positive. Marcus Coker was very impressive in his first career start. He rushed for 129 yards. Our defense, I thought, played pretty well, only giving up 13 points, 313 yards to Indiana. Ben Chappell alone is averaging more passing yards per game than 313. We limited him to 222 yards through the air. He averaged less than 5 yards per attempt. That's great defense by our secondary. Stanzi, he had a little bit of an off game, missed a few throws in there, but he still completed 66% of his passes, made a clutch fourth quarter pass to Marvin McNutt for the win. All around, I thought we played pretty well. It's just a matter of converting those red zone opportunities into touchdowns instead of field goals.
Absolutely. It would be, as Mike talked about, another big test this weekend as we take on Northwestern. We'll talk about that game at the end of the show. BCS getting very interesting now. The 9AQs are stepping up their game. TCU had a big win this weekend, 47-7 over Utah. TCU now number 3 in the BCS. Boise State right behind them at number 4. So the question is, which one of these 2 teams deserves the national title? This is our hypothetical scenario. Let's just say one of these teams can get into the national championship game. Who would you take, Jake? Who do you think is the more deserving team?
Well, if we're talking about deserving team, I will have to take Boise State. They have proven themselves in BCS games in the past. Last year, especially against TCU. Going into that game, everyone was taking TCU because TCU had a much more difficult schedule. Everyone was saying that the TCU defense that ranked in the top 5 in total defense that year was just going to stop Boise State, which they did hold them to 17 points, but Boise State really controlled that game. They won 17-10. They returned 20 of the same starters that beat the same TCU team last year, actually within the same calendar year. They have dismantled everyone on their schedule so far besides Virginia Tech, but Virginia Tech is a very good opponent. After their loss to James Madison, Virginia Tech has actually won 7 in a row right now. So they do have that quality win on their resume so far. Other than that, Boise State's recent past, Kellen Moore at quarterback, I think Boise State is definitely deserving of going to the national championship.
Yeah, I mean, look, Boise State, when they have a month to prepare, they can probably beat anybody in the country. And TCU doesn't play a very tough schedule either, but a 47-7 victory over Utah is more impressive than any win Boise State has this season. I think Utah is just as good and obviously ranked much higher than Virginia Tech. I think Boise State has a chance to prove themselves a little more against Nevada, but I think at this point in the season you have to take TCU. They have the #1 scoring defense in the country. Boise State, #2. But Mountain West, a little bit of a tougher conference week by week than the Western Athletic Conference. And I think TCU, their ability to win big against the Mountain West Conference teams is impressive, and they beat Baylor 45-10, a team in the Big 12 who still has a shot to go to the Big 12 championship game. So if we're looking at schedule strength, TCU is going to have the advantage. You talk about the bowl game. I think that's an important consideration. The season before, TCU beat Boise State in the Poinsettia Bowl, so these teams gone back and forth. I hope we don't see them play again, but I think TCU, based on their schedule alone, gets them the nod over Boise State.
Completely agree. And Jake, you always like to bring up our good friend Jeff Sagarin. And you know where Jeff Sagarin has Boise State ranked? 10th, because their schedule is a joke. They don't play anybody all year. TCU's schedule is not much better, but TCU went on the road. They beat the number 5 team in college football 47-7. Do you realize with TCU, over the last 371 minutes and 24 seconds of game time, they have given up 3 touchdowns. This defense is amazing. Over the last 6 games, they have not given up more than 7 points. And since I only go by what's happened this year, not what's happened last year. But if you want to talk about who's the most winningest quarterback in college football, it's not Kellen Moore. It's my man Andy Dalton, who's won 39 games as a starter. And here's why I also like Andy Dalton. On October 6th, he got engaged. And ever since he's gotten engaged, he's thrown, listen to this, 13 touchdowns and 1 interception, and has completed 70% of his passes. TCU, listen to this, in a better conference. The Mountain West is way better than the WAC. I don't think anybody's disputing that. 4 possessions they have given up out of score. 68 possessions is how many possessions the other teams have had in all those games. 4 scores on 68 possessions. This defense is amazing. Louisiana Tech put up numbers on Boise's defense. TCU, without a doubt, right now is playing better football than Boise State. And if it comes to these 2 teams, it has to be TCU.
Well, a lot of people like to bring up the Boise State schedule, but I believe right now Boise State has a higher strength of schedule than I think Wisconsin in the Big Ten. I mean, obviously that's going to
TCU's is better though.
Yeah, that's gonna change at the end of the season because Boise State still has to go through the rest of their schedule in that WAC, which is a terrible conference. I'm not going to make an argument for that. But back to Mike's point about Boise State being able to beat anyone when they have 30 days to prepare. How many days are they going to have to prepare for the national championship if they get there?
Yeah,
about
they'll
30.
They'll have plenty.
That's always used as a scapegoat, and they had that much time to prepare for TCU last year. The exact same argument was made last year. TCU played a better schedule. They had the top-ranked defense in the country. They beat Utah, which was a very good team last year, too. They blew them out of the water. And Boise State proved that they were the better team. They returned almost all those starters. Kellen Moore leads the nation in passing efficiency. Boise State's the only team that's ranked in the top 5 in both total offense and total defense in the nation.
Well, TCU is top 10 in total offense. But I will say this, by that logic, then Boise State should beat Oregon again because Oregon returns relatively the same team, and Boise beat them last year. But I think Oregon would blow Boise out of the water if these two teams played this year.
I'll tell you what, I don't know if that would happen. I think Oregon would win, be a close game. Again, what you have to go back to is what's reflected in the schedule. TCU, tougher schedule, equally or more impressive in most of their games against better competition. So I think TCU has to get the nod. Obviously, if you're looking over the last 4 years, they're basically the same. TCU beat Boise State in a bowl game. Boise State beat TCU in a bowl game. They're basically equal. So what's the difference? It's the strength of schedule and quality wins. I think you have to go with TCU with a slight edge. It's really close, though.
Yeah, I also think it's very close. And when I say that I think Boise State deserves to go to the BCS National Championship, I actually think TCU would go to the national championship based on strength of the schedule because that's a huge component in the BCS standings. In the human polls, they're going to be very close, but in the computer polls, at the end of the year, TCU will be ahead of Boise, and they will go to the national championship if it is a non-AQ team going to national championship.
Right, and like I said, Boise State still has a prime opportunity to beat Nevada, a team that's ranked 21st in the country right now. You know, we might not like Nevada a whole lot here, but the pollsters have put them number 21. They're number 21 in the BCS. The computers like them enough to have them there as well. So I think Nevada is another opportunity for Boise State to get some sort of what you could call a signature win.
here's another signature win opportunity for TCU. They play San Diego State this weekend, who, by the way, is 7-2. People laugh at that. San Diego State is better than just about every team in the WAC. Let's be honest. San Diego State is a good football team. They've beaten Air Force, who's one of the best teams in the Mountain West. Their only out-of-conference loss was a 2-point loss on the road to Missouri. I mean, San Diego State, I think, is a better win than most of the wins that are producing in the WAC. And in my case for TCU is just how amazing their defensive statistics are in a conference that's better than the WAC. I mean, these numbers that they're doing on defense, and just be the number 5. When's the last time Boise State has blown out a ranked team like that? TCU blows out ranked teams nearly every time they play them. The only exception was maybe Oregon State earlier in this year, but both of these teams have beaten Oregon State, so that really just negates each other. They're both of them got to play.
And I go back to that Baylor win once again. Their ability to contain Robert Griffin III and hold that offense to only 10 points. We've seen how Baylor's played most of this season. That's impressive enough in and of itself. I think Boise State would beat Baylor as well, but they don't play each other. So Boise State is so difficult because again we go back to reflection of schedule and we go to how much time do you have to prepare. And Boise State, when they have time to prepare, they can probably beat just about anybody in the country. So therefore, but other teams have that too. So therefore, you have to go what's reflected in the schedule. TCU just the slight edge.
And as long as we're talking about hypotheticals here, and we're talking about non-AQ teams possibly getting a national championship, would you put an undefeated TCU team ahead of, let's say, a one-loss Auburn team if they lose to Alabama, rebound, still win the SEC championship? Do you think Auburn still gets in ahead of TCU or a Boise State?
I do. Absolutely. No doubt about it in my mind in terms of what we talked about, the schedule, the strength of schedule.
Yeah, especially considering the fact that Auburn is number 1 in the computers. I don't think one loss will hurt them that much, considering the fact that Missouri has 2 losses and they still are in the top 10 in the computers. I think if Auburn would lose one game, they wouldn't get hit that much in the computers. I think the pollsters would take that loss if they win the SEC title game, and I think the pollsters would end up putting them in, even though it would be a late loss. And I think Auburn would be definitely deserving, considering the amount of ranked teams that they've beaten this year, and considering the fact that they went through the SEC almost unscathed, pretty much only 1 loss on the road to Alabama. That's hypothetically, of course. I think Auburn would get it. What do you think, Jake? Do you see the pollsters now are impressed with TCU? The computers are impressed. The computers have TCU number 2 in college football. Boise keeps sliding in the computers. What would you think would happen?
Well, right now, Wisconsin's the highest-ranked one-loss team. I don't think they would get ahead of either Boise State or TCU if they're undefeated. But Auburn is that wild card. If they do lose to Alabama, they still have a chance to prove themselves against probably either South Carolina, who beat Alabama, or Florida, who has that large name, that prestigious program. I think if they lose to Alabama and then they win in the SEC championship, I could definitely see them getting to the national championship. But if they do lose to Alabama, that SEC championship isn't going to be a gimme. And if they end up losing to Alabama and then in the SEC championship, then it will get really interesting because I just don't see a team like Wisconsin or another one-loss team, maybe Stanford, or I don't know of any other one-loss team that you could make the argument that they'd be ahead.
It'd be interesting to see how it played out. I think when push comes to shove, the pollsters might pull somebody like Wisconsin or Stanford ahead of TCU or Boise State. And I know it sounds crazy now, but when you get down to looking at the schedules throughout the whole year, it'd be difficult, and especially in terms of quality wins and the toughness of a schedule, a BCS conference schedule. I think the pollsters we're not going to allow TCU or Boise State to get the national title.
If you look at the computer rankings where Stanford is, Stanford, I believe, is 3rd in the computer rankings. Their only loss to Oregon, and they have one of the toughest schedules in college football. I think they have one of the top 10 toughest schedules actually ranked right now in college football, which makes it even more intriguing. I think also, too, you have LSU in the BCS sitting there at number 5, but there's really practically there's no chance that they're going to get to the SEC title game unless Auburn loses to Georgia and Alabama. Does LSU sneak in, even if they wouldn't play in the SEC title game?
It is possible. We have seen teams go to the national championship without actually winning their conference. Nebraska, I believe in, 2001, didn't even get to the Big 12 championship, still went to the national championship. Oklahoma, a couple of years after, went to the national championship after losing to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship. So it definitely is possible, especially with the quality wins that LSU has, their only loss being to Auburn. I think LSU would stand a chance. They'd be up there in the computer polls. I'm not sure how the humans would vote them in because they have had some very close calls against some marginal opponents. But I don't think LSU would sneak in. That's my
I think